President Biden releasing his first campaign ad of 2024, and former President Trump now facing another challenge to remove him from a different ballot, this time in Illinois. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. If you could, first tell us what's in President Biden's latest campaign message.
Good evening to you, Steve. President Biden's campaign today released his first TV ad of 2024, trying to cast President Biden as a defender of democracy. While it did not directly mention Trump's name, it did include images showing the January 6th incident with Trump's flags in it. Let's take a look.
There's an extremist movement that does not share the basic beliefs in our democracy. All of us are being asked right now, what will we do to maintain our democracy?
President Biden has called Trump a threat to democracy and will make that theme of a speech to this Friday in Pennsylvania, a day before the third anniversary of the January 6th incident. Meanwhile, former President Trump has also called Biden a threat to democracy, and Trump will hold Iowa rallies this Saturday. Steve.
So, Iris, as we mentioned at the top, Trump's also facing a new challenge to remove him from the ballot, this time in the state of Illinois. Tell us more about this.
You're right, Steve. So 5 people in Illinois working with a voting rights group today filed a formal objection trying to keep Trump off the ballot in Illinois right there. And they again cited the 14th Amendment, accusing Trump of participating in an insurrection. Meanwhile, we know that Trump's team has maintained that January 6th was not an insurrection and that there's no way that Trump participated in one ever. The similar challenges filed by voters themselves, meanwhile, have failed in both Michigan and Minnesota. So these are not working out in other states, at least for now. And when it comes to the Colorado Supreme Court ruling, which has been playing out for the past 2 weeks, we know that the order is now on hold and pending any action by the U.S. Supreme Court right here in D.C. So unless the High Court acts by tomorrow and Friday, which is when the Colorado primary ballots are to be certified, we do expect to see Trump's name on that ballot. Right there, Steve.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao reporting for us live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. Presidential candidate Christie publishing a new campaign ad saying he has an admission to make. Here's what he says about former President Trump.
I have an admission to make. 8 years ago, when I decided to endorse Donald Trump for president, I did it because he was winning. And I did it because I thought I could make him a better candidate and a better president. Well, I was wrong.
Christie strongly endorsed Trump back in 2016. After dropping out of the race, the former governor defended Trump in various instances. He reportedly also tried to become Trump's running mate, or also was seeking the attorney general position. Now Christie telling voters he made a mistake and that they should not vote for Trump. He says the former president would, quote, sell the soul of this country. Former President Trump's name is back on the Colorado primary ballot, pending 2 appeals to the United States Supreme Court. What might we expect moving forward? To find out, let's bring in Brad Smith, former commissioner at the Federal Election Commission and currently professor of law at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio. Brad Smith, thank you so much for joining.
It's my pleasure.
Do you think that the Colorado Supreme Court and Maine Secretary of State have violated the voting rights of residents in those states?
The democratic values you allude to really ought to inform our discussion. And I think that the Maine Secretary of State, who's not even a lawyer and didn't really have any kind of hearing process, and the Colorado Supreme Court have both taken a path that is very detrimental to our politics, very damaging to long-term political discourse and comedy in the country.
What remedies of law do the voters in Colorado and Maine have to fight against a, political candidate, President Trump or anyone else, being barred from the ballot without due process?
Right. Well, the president has raised a number of issues in his appeal to the Supreme Court. They include some technical issues, and by technical, I don't mean trivial, but not getting to that substance of did he engage in an insurrection, which is the grounds they're using for keeping him off the ballot. One of those, for example, is that that provision of the 14th Amendment simply does not cover the office of president, and that's actually the basis on which the Colorado trial court first held that Trump could be on the ballot. So those are, like I say, are not trivial, but the bottom line really comes down to how are you going to interpret this idea of engaging in an insurrection. And this was a post-Civil War amendment, and it was to keep old Confederates from coming back into office, being elected by southern states. So, for example, you could take someone like, say, Howell Cobb was a congressman from Georgia. He resigned from Congress, became a general in and then served in Jefferson Davis's cabinet. There's no doubt, in one sentence, I've given you a description that I think every single person in America would agree constitutes engaging in an insurrection. All right. The problem with the Trump situation is it's highly contested whether what happened on January 6th was an insurrection, whether Trump engaged in it in any way through comments he made. And one of the things that's worth noting is that in all the prosecutions of January 6th rioters or people who entered the Capitol, they have never charged anybody with insurrection. And so I think what's going to happen is this is going to go to the Supreme Court, and I expect that the Supreme Court will rule that Trump can be on the ballot. There's any number of grounds they could do so, including simply that the term insurrection has to be much more narrowly defined. It has to mean something like what Howell Cobb did, resign from Congress, become a Confederate general. But they might use more technical grounds, such as suggesting that this is something that Congress has to pass legislation before courts can decide it. Congress has to say, what does an insurrection mean? What is the due process requirements to prove an insurrection? So if this will go to the Supreme Court, and that's where the decision will be made, and I suspect that on one grounds or another it will be favorable to President Trump.
How do you see us getting past all of these partisan issues that are oftentimes fueled by one's partisan beliefs and subject to interpretation?
On parts of the right, but we also see it on parts of the left, and we see it in these kind of like legal efforts to keep Trump off the ballot. And there's a lot of talk about breaking norms. Well, trying to use the 13th Amendment in this way to keep somebody off the ballot is breaking a norm. And it poses a real danger. I mean, somebody could look at the events in the summer of 2020, those riots, and they could say far more people injured, far more property damage, more people killed. And some of these rioters actually set up areas in Seattle they called the autonomous zone and said they were free from local authorities. So maybe somebody would say, well, why isn't that an insurrection? And if that's an insurrection, Kamala Harris offered to pay bail for people or help fund a group that offered to pay bail for people who were arrested. So is that providing aid and comfort? And, you can envision local authorities all over the country starting to engage in this warfare. If you keep Trump off, we're going to keep Biden off and that sort of thing in future elections. And the real answer, as much as it's not perhaps a very satisfactory one, it's just we all need to exercise a little bit of self-restraint, have confidence in our processes, and have confidence in the voters, that they will make a reasonable decision. But right now, you have a lot of people on both sides, and in the particular case we're talking about, people on the left who are just in near hysteria about the prospect that Trump would win another election, and so they're breaking norms to try to prevent him from even being on the ballot.
Brad Smith, really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So even as Senate negotiators are trying to work out a bipartisan plan to deal with the border crisis, some Republicans are now trying to use leverage elsewhere to meet their demands, some bluntly saying, shut down the border or shut down the government. This as Congress is coming up on a fast-approaching deadline for funding the government. NTD's congressional correspondent Melina Wisecup reports.
We see a fierce showdown taking shape around funding the government. Up until this point, Ukraine aid has been the main source of leverage that House Republicans have used to make demands for border policy change. But now it's looking like keeping the lights on here in the U.S. government may be dependent upon changes at the border. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas leading the effort.
Ranchers, local law enforcement, local leaders, and they all told me the same thing. Shut down the border or shut down the government. That's it.
If they can't love our country and the citizens enough and respect our laws, then we need to cut off funding. We need to shut the government down.
Lawmakers will return from their trip to Eagle Pass, Texas, here to Congress, facing a fast-approaching January 19th deadline to fund the government to avoid a partial government shutdown. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has not directly endorsed the idea of shutting down the government in order to force border policy changes, but he has essentially said that their demands are the only way to directly and effectively address the issue at the border.
H.R. 2 is the necessary ingredient.
H.R. 2 is a bill that the Republican-led House passed several months ago. It would restart construction of the border wall, raise the bar for asylum claims, also return to a Trump-era policy known as Remain in Mexico, all proposals which Senate negotiators say are going nowhere fast.
I can't get a Democratic Senate to be able to agree with that at all, and I can't get a White House to be able to agree with that.
My understanding is that H.R. 2 doesn't have Democratic votes in the House or in the Senate.
The White House says that the solution here is for Congress to give the DHS more money and resources to address the issue. However, Republicans are concerned that that money will only be used to quickly process more illegal immigrants and release them into the country rather than be used to stem the flow. This battle over border policy has once only stalled Ukraine aid, but now the entire U.S. government may be dependent on it. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.